Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'd like to ask perhaps the head of secretariat to confirm that I can be heard. Can I be heard?
You're heard loud and clear.
Thank you very much. Distinguished participants, members, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. Welcome again to the Association of Maritime Practitioners of Kenya webinar series. The AMPK endeavors to engage its members, the maritime fraternity in Kenya, East Africa, and beyond in addressing topical issues and thus contribute not only to building collective professional awareness, but also to contribute to national, regional, and international maritime discourse. This afternoon, I am particularly honored to hold this webinar and to introduce the presenter for this afternoon, who is a Kenyan, a leading international maritime expert and diplomat, who in many forums would not require an introduction. His profile is very rich, very well packed, and I'm proud that he has made it here with us this afternoon to present to us on the topic of the IMO system for maritime governance. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. JUVENAL SHIUNDU, our presenter for this afternoon, is a holder of Master of Science in Maritime Safety Administration, majoring in marine engineering from the World Maritime University, Sweden. He holds a Bachelor of Science honors from the University of Newcastle, the UK, in naval architecture, shipbuilding, naval architecture and shipbuilding. He is also an alumni of the prestigious Ashridge Business School in the UK. He is a former chair director of the Technical Cooperation Division of the International Maritime Organization in London. He is also the former head of the African section in the Technical Cooperation Division of the International Maritime Organization in London, a former general manager of the African Marine and General Engineering Company Limited, famously known as AMGECO in Mombasa, Kenya, and a former assistant merchant shipping superintendent of the Kenya Ports Authority. Mr. JUVENAL SHIUNDU, just to share a bit of his very rich profile, both in Kenya, in the region, and international, is the first naval architect, a Kenyan naval architect, having graduated with the said Bachelors of Naval Architecture and Shipbuilding in 1983 from the University of Newcastle in the UK. And having retired from the IMO, he is now the current chairperson of the board of directors of the Kenyan National Shipping Line Limited. Mr. SHIUNDU has authored and contributed to numerous articles and publications, resourced and moderated at many international conferences and seminars. He has also appeared as a key witness, expert witness to several formal commissions of inquiries involving maritime accidents, including the Tongwe ferry incident in Mombasa. Mr. SHIUNDU has over 35 years of international experience in the maritime and transport sectors involving managing and implementing development cooperation programs. And it will be interesting to many to learn that Mr. SHIUNDU was among the initiators and formulators of the concept paper and action plan for the railway line, oil refinery, oil pipeline, Lamu Freeport, famously known as RULA project, which later became known as the LAPSET project. Mr. SHIUNDU featured in the book Life Journeys Scaling Heights, with High Achieving Men in Kenya, that was published by the Footprints Press in 2011. And in recognition of his service, in December 2019, Mr. SHIUNDU received the Freedom of the City of London Award in recognition of his services to international diplomacy charitable causes. This afternoon, we are very lucky to have a topic that is quite interesting and that has drawn quite a wide interest locally and regionally. And I am happy this afternoon to inform you all that this webinar is being streamed live on YouTube, on Facebook, and has been made part of the curriculum, which will be, I'm told, quite interestingly, be part of the coursework for this term for students at the Technical University of Mombasa who are undertaking the Bachelors of Technology in Marine Engineering and the Bachelors of Science in Maritime Management, who are studying a course in Maritime Law and Conventions, and IMO, and the work of the IMO features heavily in these modules. So I'm very happy to report that we have at least 2 classes that are attending this lecture today as a formal part of their training, which will contribute towards their studies. With that not so short introduction of our presenter this afternoon, I take this opportunity to welcome Mr. SHIUNDU, and to all participants, please be ready with your questions in the second part of this webinar. The presenter this afternoon will present for 40 minutes, and the second part of the webinar will be a question and answer session that will last for another 40 minutes. So, ladies and gentlemen, prepare your questions. Let us engage our presenter this afternoon, and we will be very happy if at all we can make maximum use of this very rare opportunity that we have this afternoon. Thank you so much. I now hand over the floor to our presenter, Mr. JUVENAL SHIUNDU. Karibu sana.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, all. Thank you again, President Bakari, the President of the Association of Maritime Practitioners of Kenya, for those kind words about me. I'm humbled and honored to have been invited to make this presentation this afternoon, whose title is the IMO System for Maritime Governance. First of all, maritime governance is quite misunderstood.
Mr. SHIUNDU, sir?
Yes. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Can you confirm that you can hear me, sir?
Yes, I can hear you. And can you hear me? Maritime governance is, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, sir. Yes, sir. I think I can hear you, and I can confirm that other participants can hear you as well. You may proceed, sir.
Okay, thank you. I was saying maritime governance is a very dynamic process consisting of independent means of legal regulations, blue economy, security, safety, and environmental elements. Maritime governance has become more polycentric in nature and is driven by the global nature of shipping, which is very much international. So for this presentation, I'm just going to briefly give an overview of the IMO system for maritime governance. I'm sure many of you would have many of you or some of you would have been to IMO. Those that may not have been to IMO, that is the IMO headquarters, that building that you see there. Now, IMO is a specialized agency of the United Nations that has the mandate to deal with issues of maritime safety, security, prevention of pollution, as well as facilitation of international trade. But there are other UN specialized agencies as well, and IMO is just one of them. So we have in total 12 UN specialized agencies that include International Civil Aviation, International Labour Organization. Of course, International Labour Organization, when it comes to issues of maritime law, maritime labor laws, then you find that ILO deals with it. So those are the 12 other UN specialized agencies, of which IMO is one of them. Now, there are 175 member states of IMO, 3 associate members, a number of NGOs and IGOs which have got observer status with IMO. The latest member to join IMO this year is Botswana. One might say Botswana is a landlocked country. Why is it joining IMO? But indeed, there are a number of IMO member states that are landlocked, such as Switzerland, Mongolia, Zambia, Malawi, Uganda. They are landlocked, but because they have a stake in maritime issues, they have become members of IMO. So you can see from that picture that there is a big geographical coverage of IMO member states. When it comes to IMO's governance, of course, IMO develops and maintains a comprehensive regulatory regime that covers shipping worldwide. It protects the environment from shipping activities and has established global provision for search and rescue facilities. Indeed, one of the maritime search and rescue facilities is located in Mombasa. We have another one in South Africa, another one in Morocco, Nigeria. So the whole of the African region now is covered with the search and rescue provisions. IMO also ensures that all seafarers are properly trained and competent to manage and operate ships. It ensures compensation is available when accidents do happen. Now, in terms of governance and how IMO operates, IMO has an assembly. The assembly has got 175 member states. In other words, all IMO members are members of the assembly. The assembly meets once every 2 years. When the assembly meets, it elects a council of 40 member states, and it is those 40 member states of the council that run the IMO affairs in between the assembly sessions. There are 5 committees. We have the facilitation committee, the technical cooperation committee, the legal committee, maritime safety committee, and the marine environment protection committee. Within the committees, we have the subcommittees. We have 7 subcommittees. There is a subcommittee on ship design and construction, a subcommittee on ship systems and equipment, a subcommittee on human element training and watchkeeping, which used to be called STCW subcommittee is now called human element training and watchkeeping. We have another subcommittee on navigation, communication, and search and rescue. Subcommittee for carriage of goods and containers. Subcommittee on implementation of IMO instrument, popularly known as III. And we have another subcommittee for pollution prevention and response. So a lot of technical work is carried on at subcommittee level. Then the subcommittee report to the main 5 committees, and then the committees, of course, report to the IMO Council. And finally, once every 2 years, the matters get to the IMO Assembly. Now, in terms of the conventions, IMO has to date developed about 53 treaty instruments, which are many guidelines, codes, protocols. So the main instruments are SOLAS, and you can see that 166 parties, or 99.98% of world tonnage, are parties to SOLAS. We have Load Line Convention, we have MAPOL, Annex 1 and Annex 2, having 157 parties, covering 99.15% of the world tonnage. Then we have MAPOL, Annex 6, COLREG, 161 parties, STCW, 165 parties, and of course, the FAL Convention. These are just, the main conventions out of the other 53 instruments. So other than the IMO conventions, you've got what is you call the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS. So a lot of governance of maritime or ocean governance derives from the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, and there are various parties that are concerned with this, the law of the sea. IMO is one of them. You have the International Whaling Commission is one of them. Food and Agricultural Organization, of course, when it comes to matters to do with fishing and fisheries, FAO is has the mandate. You've got the UNEP with its headquarters in Nairobi. Then you've got the Convention on Biological Diversity, the CBD. Then you have a lot of regional seas conventions. You have, for example, Nairobi has a convention on the seas. Then you have UNESCO. So when it comes to the overall governance of the ocean, then you find that other than IMO, there are all these other UN organizations that are charged with ensuring that the law of the sea is applied as it should. So IMO does not work in isolation. It works with all these organizations on matters of maritime governance. It's always asked that IMO adopts regulations only in response to marine accidents. Well, is that true or is it false? We shall see as we proceed with this presentation whether it is true that IMO reacts after accidents or whether IMO initiates the development of regulations. So when you come to how regulations and guidance are developed, you find that quite often there is a casualty. When there is a casualty, there is a lot of media publicity, There's a lot of political, tensions and calling on why is this accident happening? Do we need to review the technology? And it is in the process that after the accident, usually that a proposal is made to IMO. When the proposal is made, of course, member states would meet to discuss the proposal depending on which subject. For example, if it is to do with the safety of navigation, it will be discussed by the Maritime Safety Committee. If it is to do with the pollution, it will be discussed by the Marine Environmental Protection Committee. If it is to do with the legal issues, it will be discussed by the Legal Committee. And then after the discussion, a draft text is prepared. After the draft text is prepared, then it is adopted or approved. Now, this can take several years. For example, the Nairobi Convention on the wreck removal took more than 10 years from the time the discussion started to the time that a diplomatic conference was called in Nairobi in 2007 to adopt the Nairobi Wreck Removal Convention. On the other hand, the Isps Code took less than 3 years from the time we had the 9/11 to the time that the Isps Code came into being in July 2004 was less than three years. So this is just to give you an example that certain regulations can take very long to come into force or before there's a diplomatic conference, but others, depending on the political will of the member states, can take a very short time for the regulations to come into place. Now, who decides how the regulations come into place? Of course, IMO is a collective will of the member states. Member states are the ones that make decisions, and most of the decisions at IMO are based on consensus. In other words, IMO member states avoid as much as possible to have to make a decision by voting. So they try to ensure that there is consensus in arriving at most of the decisions at IMO. Debates are informed by inputs from international and non-governmental organizations that have got consultative status. For example, matters that are highly technical, you may find, for example, classification societies play a very key role in making contributions or giving input to some of the discussions at IMO. And of course, once the regulations have been adopted, they have to be implemented, because if you adopt the regulations and you don't implement them at the member state level, then you find that shipping cannot be as safe as it should be. When it comes to implementation, it is the responsibility of the member states to ensure that the regulations that are adopted at IMO are implemented at the country, at domestic level. And how is this done? This is done through what you call flag states on their own flagged ships. And of course, you've got port state control, which is the second line of defense. In other words, if the state where the ship is registered has got to ensure that that particular ship and its operations complies with the IMO treaties. Now, when that ship visits another port, then that port's, what you call port state control, has to ensure that this ship complies with the IMO regulations. We have a number of port state regimes in the world. For example, Kenya would fall under the Indian Ocean MOU. In West Africa, you have what we call the Abuja MOU, which covers West and Central Africa. And then in Europe, you have what you call the Paris MOU. There is also the Black Sea MOU. So the whole world has been covered by a number of MOUs that ensure that the port state control regime is carried out. And then of recent, we have what you call a mandatory IMO member state audit scheme, which aims that every 7 years, a member state is audited, or an audit is carried out in a member state once every 7 years. So when it comes to implementation, it has been found that a lot of developing countries do not have capacity to implement the IMO conventions. For that reason, the IMO Technical Cooperation was established with a view to giving technical assistance to developing countries to help them build both institutional and human capacity to implement the IMO conventions. With that, the World Maritime University was established as in 1983 as an institute of higher learning to train again officers from developing countries. And then we have what you call International Maritime Law Institute that is located in Malta, which is meant to train. It was realized that the developing countries lacked capacity, especially for drafting legislation or for domesticating legislation. So IMLI normally would take people who have already done a first degree in law, and they would go there and be able to train in maritime law. It's a 9 months course. But of course, also for the technical cooperation, IMO has a partnership with a number of either member states or international organizations that help to contribute towards the capacity building. Now, we all know that the 2030 agenda is there on sustainable development goals. So IMO has a role in ensuring that the sustainable development goals are implemented, and those goals that are relevant to the IMO mandate are also implemented, or IMO assists member states to implement those goals. When you look at the current IMO strategic plan is for 2018 to 2023. Now the strategic plan has got 7 strategic directions. Now within those 7 strategic directions, the first one is improve implementation of IMO instruments. The second one is integrate new and advancing technologies in the regulatory framework. The third is respond to climate change. The fourth is engage in ocean governance. The fifth is engage global facilitation and security of international trade. The sixth is ensure regulatory effectiveness. And seventh is ensure organization effectiveness. These strategic directions were done in 2018. And of course, last year we have had COVID, and IMO has had to move like any other organization to ensure that there is a post-COVID recovery. Indeed, seafarers were the most affected last year during COVID, because a lot of countries did not want to allow for the change of crews, and IMO together with the UN to come up with a lot of calls for member states to allow for crew changes. When we come to the SDG number 13, which is a climate action, IMO, like any other organization or member states, is also responding to the issues of climate change. Indeed, in 2018, IMO came up with an ambitious strategy called the IMO 2020, which is meant to limit the sulfur content in marine fuels. For those who attended the recent seminar organized by the Association of Maritime Practitioners, you may have listened to the kind of fuels that are being proposed. We've just come out of COP26. There was a lot of talk on greenhouse gas emissions. This week, in fact, today, IMO is finishing the Marine Environment Protection Committee, the 77th session, and there has been a lot of call for IMO to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions to zero by 2050. Whether that will be done, that remains a key topical issue now at IMO for the foreseeable future. When it comes to issues of governance in the ocean or the protecting the blue economy, we have issues of marine litter, we have issues of fishing vessel and preventing illegal and unregulated fishing. We have IMO is also dealing with the Polar Code, and of course, the UN oceans. Issues of oceans have now become very important to IMO. And indeed, those who have been following the ocean issues, in 2019, the World Maritime University opened an ocean institute with funding of $100 million from the Nippon Foundation. So the matters of oceans are now being given prominence within IMO more than it was before. Now, there is this question of maritime domain awareness. Most countries have not really defined what their maritime domain awareness is. Now, this can be defined as the effective understanding of anything associated with the maritime domain in the country that could impact security, safety, economy, or the environment. Maritime domain awareness is equal to maritime situational awareness, MSA, plus the threats awareness. The objective is for a country at a country level or regional level is to detect, assess, and support the response to any threat to maritime security that could affect safety, security, the environment of the economy. Of course, when there is no security, then maritime trade cannot flow. You also what happened during at the height of piracy off the coast of Somalia. We found that the maritime trade was affected. The freight rates, went up just because there was no security. So it's very important that there has to be security in order to allow for a flow of maritime trade. The underlying assumption is that acquiring and sharing maritime information with a broad array of partners reduce vulnerability to attack and improves cooperation towards maritime security and safety. effective maritime situation awareness utilizes a layered approach. So IMO encourages member states to ensure that they have the maritime domain awareness in their coastal waters in order to improve the issues that I have mentioned. Of course, I did refer to the Isps code that came into being in July 2004 that put maritime security challenges at a very high agenda within the member states. And of course, with maritime security, you are dealing with issues of illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, irregular human migration. We have seen a lot of movements of people with a lot of small boats being overloaded, especially crossing the Mediterranean from Africa, trying to go to Europe. The stowaways is an issue, piracy, which I referred to earlier, maritime terrorism, weapons and narcotic smuggling, cybersecurity, and theft from the heritage shipwrecks. These are emerging challenges that now IMO has to deal with. And of course, I mentioned earlier, one of the strategic directions, or in fact, the first one for IMO is to integrate new technology sorry, I have to go back. Yeah, integrate new technology in its regulatory framework. At the moment, we've got IMO is dealing with the regulatory scooping exercise on maritime autonomous service ships. You may or may not have heard of maritime autonomous service ships, the ships that will be able to go from A to B without any seafarers. And the issues being looked at is the ship with automated processes and decisions support either seafarers on board, or some operations may be fully automated, remotely controlled ships with the seafarers on board, or remotely controlled ships without seafarers on board. Fully autonomous ships, the operating system of the ship that is able to make decisions and determine actions by itself. We have issues of energy efficiency and just-in-time operations. These are the emerging challenges that IMO is having to deal with. And of course, issues of COVID disruption. Last year, we saw a lot of disruption of the global supply chain that was caused because of the COVID disruption. The UNCTAD Review Transport Report 2020, for those who may have looked at it, shows that last year, international maritime trade declined by 4.1%. In 2021, the trade is just picking up and is expected to expand by 4.8%. You've heard of the cost of shipping containers has really gone up. In some region, for example, in the US, the trade between China and the USA, they've had shortage of containers. The freight rates that used to be $2,000 for a 20-foot container from China to the USA is now going for almost $25,000. And there have been, ports have been congested, and there has been a shortage of containers. So all these has been caused by the COVID disruption, and member states and as well as IMO are having to deal with the aftermath of that. If we look at the challenges, some of the challenges that shipping is facing, you find, if you look at the containers, for example, the containers started in 1968, when the first container ship was designed to carry 1,530 TEUs. By 2006, we had ships such as the Emma Mask carrying 11,000 plus TEUs. By 2019, we are now having ships going to carry over 20,000 TEUs. This has caused a big challenge in terms of regulations and also in terms of the ports that are meant to be prepared to handle such big ships. So in terms of container carrying capacity, we see that the containers sizes of ships has increased by 1,500 since 1968. All these give challenges to the governance in maritime issues. We've talked of the ships of the future, whether they will be autonomous or not, whether they will be powered by wind, by LNG, by ammonia or not. All this will impact to the way the regulations are made. If we look at the ship casualties, of course, because of the intervention of IMO with its member states over the years, we see that the total losses by year of ships has declined by 68% over a decade. For example, in 2010, there were about 130 casualties. That has come down to 41 in 2019. So one can see that the governance or the regulations set by IMO has minimized the casualties going down by 68%. So that is the end of my presentation, and I'll be pleased to answer any questions that you may have or comments that you may have. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. SHIUNDU, for that most enlightening presentation this afternoon. And ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants, we have now come to the second part of our webinar this afternoon. I'll take this opportunity to invite questions to our panelist, Mr. SHIUNDU. I'm very sure he had a lot of difficulties trying to pack all his wide experience, far-reaching, long experience of both regionally and internationally into a 40-minute presentation. So I'll call upon all the participants to take advantage of the second part of the webinar to ask questions that will draw into the wealth of knowledge that our presenter possesses. And we have two ways of raising questions. At the bottom of the screen, we will be able to see an icon, a Q&A icon. We could write questions and forward them through that icon. And secondly, we could as well, any participant can raise their questions verbally by using the icon at the bottom right of your screens, raise hand. If you click on that, I will be able to see and give you an opportunity to address, to ask your question to the presenter verbally. So without much further ado, I welcome your questions, and I'll go straight to the first question, which has been forwarded by Kemunto Fiona. And the question reads as follows: cybersecurity is an emerging challenge, as our host, Mr. SHIUNDU, has stated. Which measures is IMO placing in order to curb the upcoming cases in the maritime sector? This being the only question pertaining to cybersecurity, I will request our presenter to address it, and any further questions that come in a similar category, I will put them together and they will be answered as a group. So please, Mr. SHIUNDU, please take the floor and address the questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I can hear some echo. Would everybody not talking, please mute? Okay. Thanks very much, Fiona, for that question, which is a very good question. Of course, the issues of cybersecurity is very threatening not only in the maritime trade, but in all other trade, as the world adopts issues of digitalization, because most businesses now have factored digitalization in their strategies. Now, the more digitalization you do, the more risk you are for cyber attack or cyber security. So what IMO did, the Maritime Safety Committee came up with the resolution 429 that addresses cyber risks in the maritime industry. This IMO resolution effectively addresses the cybersecurity as part of what they call the safety management system within the ISM code. They've come up with, IMO has come up with guidelines that have been published. It is called IMO 2021 Cybersecurity. And you can request, or you can download that IMO 2021 Cybersecurity. You can download it from the IMO website, which will give you all the information that is needed. In other words, IMO has been proactive in ensuring that they come up with the guidelines that would guide not only shipping companies, but also member states. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. SHIUNDU, for that very elaborate answer to the question. At this moment, I'd like to appreciate the presence of Captain Talib Khamis, the CEO, Lamu Shipping, Chief Engineer, Marine Engineer Samba of Kenya Maritime Authority, Makiri Manasseh of the Tanzania Shipping Agencies Corporation. Welcome. We appreciate your presence this afternoon. Ms. Betty McKenna of the International Transport Workers Federation. Karibu sana. We appreciate your presence here. And Dr. Christian Adea, the head of the chair of the Department of Marine Engineering and Maritime Operations of Jomo Kenyatta University. Karibuni sana. Again, we have members of the media, Ms. Dalila Hamza and other members of the media, various press organizations. Karibuni nyote. On to our second question of the afternoon. We have Kahindi Karisa, who is a student at the Technical University of Mombasa. And he asks that he seeks clarification on the issue of emerging IMO engines. I believe perhaps a marine engines technology. Is it true that these engines are in existence? Perhaps Mr. Kahindi would want a comment from our presenter on emerging technologies that address marine engineering and marine engines in particular. Perhaps Mr. SHIUNDU may comment on that.
I'm not sure what he means by emerging engines, but I take it that he's talking about the engines required to burn fuel with a low sulfur. Because of the IMO 2020 on sulfur engine, the requirement now to minimize the greenhouse gas emissions, the ships have got to be designed with the engines that can burn the new kind of fuel, low sulfur fuel required. So you may find that not only will the engines, new engines be required, but even refineries. Some of the refineries that exist cannot be able to refine the oil or the fuel with the low sulfur content. So indeed, when discussions were taking place at IMO on these low sulfur engines, most of the manufacturers of the engines were worried that they would have to come up with completely new engines that can be able to burn the new types of fuel. Of course, some engines have been modified. Scrubbers have been used on some engines to modify them in order to take the fuels with low sulfur content. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. SHIUNDU. And I believe it's quite a topical issue, particularly as regards energy efficiency and low sulfur content. And emerging technologies are very much geared towards addressing that. And I think we have quite a number of questions coming up, particularly from our student fraternity. And we have another question from Ali Juma, who is a student at the Technical University of Mombasa again. And he asks, what is the fate of the seafarers in the maritime industry now that the IMO is coming up with strategies of using autonomous ships in the global maritime market? Perhaps the maritime industry itself is heading towards these technologies, and IMO as well gearing itself to addressing these emerging technologies.
Well,
to combine that with the other question so that you may address both of them together. And we have another question on, it reads, Mr. SHIUNDU, for the detailed presentation on IMO, okay. Can you please shed light on the people who run the IMO? How is the Secretary General and heads of divisions selected? Is there a regional balance? So 2 questions, one on mass autonomous ships, surface ships, and how would that affect seafarers of the future? And again, another question on the people that man the IMO and the selection process. Mr. SHIUNDU, please.
Thank you. Is it Ali Juma who asked that question? First of all, the issues of autonomous ships will take a long time before it happens. This is not something that might happen in, in the near future. Indeed, in July this year, BIMCO and International Chamber of Shipping came up with a report. It was called the Seafarers Workforce Report. This Seafarers Workforce Report reports that there is 1.89 million seafarers at the moment, manning 74,000 vessels. And indeed, demand for officers to man the vessel is going up by 11.8%. The demand just for the officers that will be needed to man these vessels. And in 2026, 89,150 officers will be needed to man the vessel. So already the demand for seafarers is more than the market can supply. So we are a long way in phasing out seafarers. If anything, the countries need to come up with more training facilities for seafarers. And that's why you've seen in Kenya, there has been the concerted efforts to make Bandari College to increase the number of seafarers, not only being trained at Bandari Maritime Academy, but also other institutions such as the Technical University of Mombasa, the Kenya Coast National Polytechnic, JUVENAL, and so forth. So they should not be, Ali Juma, you should not be worried that I want to imagine you are a student. By the time you finish your training, that seafarers will be phased out. It will take ages. I mentioned earlier how long it takes to develop a convention. Now, when you come to autonomous vessels, they will have to change some of the conventions, because if SOLAS conventions requires that the vessels will be manned, so if to operate an autonomous vessel, it means we'll have to change certain IMO conventions such as SOLAS, COLREG, STCW, and so forth. That will take years. What normally happens is that sometimes technology is ahead of regulations. I don't know if you, sometimes in 2019, Uber came up with a driverless car in America, whereby you could be able to order the Uber, it comes, and without a driver, you go in and it takes you wherever you are going without a driver. When they were testing, the vehicle had an accident. So because of that, the media picked it up and so forth. So they've had to abandon that idea of driverless cars. In the UK, they came up with the driverless trucks that you could actually run a truck from London to Glasgow on the motorways without, without a driver. Now, before such trucks can be allowed on the road, it means that the highway code will have to be changed in order to allow such vehicles to operate alongside others. Now, that is not something that can happen quickly. It will take years before you can see these autonomous vessels operating. Thank you for that. And I will go to your second question. Maybe this question was asked by anonymous attendee. Now, the IMO Secretary General is elected. Is elected by the IMO Council. The IMO Council has got 40 member states. So it is these 40 member states that vote to elect the Secretary General, who then is eligible to serve 2 terms of 4 years each, a maximum of 2 terms. When it comes to the other heads of divisions, there's no regional balance. It's just based on competence. When positions are there, they are either advertised or filled from within on competitive basis. But as you know, nothing operates outside politics. So of course, in the appointment, you cannot have a situation where you have 2 directors from the same region or from the same country. So those are taken into account, but it's not a written rule. The written rule is you recruit, or IMO recruits from the best people available, without irrespective of the nationality and where they come from. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for those very elaborate answers. We have a question from Dalila Hamza, who seeks clarity on the part of gas emissions by 2050 and also the state of marine litters in the country. I believe perhaps that the question on marine litters will be tied to the IMO Glow Litter project that you had mentioned in your presentation. Allow me to combine that with a second question from Mr. Ali Said, who asks if the IMO has a financial committee that seeks to guarantee financial support to member states in fully ratifying of IMO conventions or achieving of member states' maritime goals. If you may comment on those 2 questions, sir.
Thank you. Dalila Hamza, you seek clarification on gas emissions by 2050. What happened is in 2018, IMO came up with an ambitious strategy, which was meant to reduce the number of emissions from ships by 50. By 2050, to reduce the amount of emission from shipping by 50% of the 2009 limits, the limits of 2008, 2009. So in order to do that, the strategy laid down what engine manufacturers have to do, the fuel refineries have to do to limit the sulfur content in the fuels. However, at the recent COP 26 meeting, certain countries have come up to say that they don't want to halve the emissions by 50% in 2050. They want shipping to reduce to 0 the emissions by 2050. In fact, at this week's Marine Environment Protection Committee, some member states, including the islands, Marshall Islands and Solomon Islands, presented a document to IMO calling for 0 emission by 2050. So this question, this paper was supported by a number of countries, However, as at yesterday, it did not have enough support to, to go through. However, one of the things that International Chamber of Shipping presented a document where they would like IMO to establish a fund, a tax called a carbon tax on fuel. So these are some of the things that establishment of a carbon fund or establishment of a research and development fund are some of the issues that were being discussed. Indeed, as we go into the next few years, I can see more and more countries calling for further reduction in the amount of emissions from shipping. Although statistically, shipping contributes to less than 3% of the total emissions. However, that 3% is still a lot, and that is why IMO has committed to reducing the emissions by 50% by 2050. In terms of marine litter, the question says also the state of marine litter in the country. So I'm not sure whether the country means Kenya or or what. But the whole thing is that if you take Kenya, for example, Kenya was among the first countries to ban these plastic papers, because you used to go to a shop and they put your shopping in plastic papers. These plastic papers were banned, and of course, if you go to the beach in Mombasa, indeed, last month I was taking a walk every morning on the beach in North Coast, and I could notice a lot of marine litter by the by the roads, I mean by the seaside, by the beach, that are washed when the tide is high. This marine litter is washed by the beachside. So indeed, the ministry responsible for environment and the authorities really need to take more action to control the issues of marine litter. If you go to the Pacific countries, for example, sometimes back when I worked with IMO, I visited the remote countries like Fiji, Tonga, and you see the issue of marine litter has really become a big problem, because some of the fish that is being caught, if you dissect the fish, you find there is a lot of particles of plastics inside the fish. And indeed, when the human beings, we human beings eat such fish that already contains small particles of plastics or marine litter, is not also good for our health. So it is in the overall public good that the issues of marine litter are addressed at global level. Thank you. What was the second question? Thank you so much. What was the second question?
I believe you have touched on both questions that I had put forward to you. One was on emissions and litter, and another one on financial assistance.
No, I haven't.
Assistance.
Yeah, I need to answer the one on financial assistance.
Okay.
By Ali Said. Well, IMO does not have a financial committee. However, IMO has got a technical cooperation committee, which I mentioned earlier, and the purpose of the technical cooperation committee is to raise funds extra budgetary, either from donors, in order to assist developing countries to ratify the conventions. IMO came up with what is called Integrated Technical Cooperation Program, ITCP, which is a biennial program with activities to help the developing countries to ratify or implement a convention. So this ITCP is funded voluntarily from either member states or from other organizations such as the World Bank, the UNDP, and so forth. So that program exists that assists not only assisting developing countries, but in some cases giving scholarships for students from developing countries to go and study at the World Maritime University or at the International Maritime Law Institute, or for short courses. For example, we have some institute in France at Le Havre that runs short courses on port management, advanced port management. So these programs do exist to assist the developing countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for those very elaborate answers once again. And we unfortunately will not be taking any more questions, new questions from the participants, and we will wind up with the last questions that have already been posted. And we have a question from Sufyan Abubakar, who asks about the measures that IMO has put in place to safeguard cargo against pirates. And I would wish to combine that with an answer, with a question from Didmas Kaseke, who asks what is being done in the region to ensure the quality of graduates match the quality required for the market. Mr. SHIUNDU, please, you may take the floor to address those questions.
Well, when I did mention the issues of maritime security, now when it comes to issues of maritime security, it includes the security not only of the vessels, of the ships, but also of the cargo on the ships, as well as the crew on the ships. In fact, I did mention what the code, which is called International Ship and Port Security Code, the ISPS code. Now, the ISPS code sets out the safety measures that are required of a port, because the port serves as an interface between the ships and the land. So the ports are supposed to ensure that they put security measures in place so that when the ships come into the port, they can be able to load cargo and depart in safely and securely. When the ship is transiting, of course, the vessel owner is supposed to put in place measures that comply with the ISPS code. Now, when it comes to pirates, for example, member states, take for example the East African region. East African region, you have, I did mention the Maritime Rescue and Coordinating Center in Mombasa. That center exchanges information with another center in Tanzania, in Seychelles, and so forth. Now, when it comes to issues of pirates, they have what you call the Djibouti Code of Conduct. Now, the Djibouti Code of Conduct, which was recently amended with what you call the Jeddah Amendment, makes sure that the member states or signatories to the Djibouti Code of Conduct, which are basically the countries in the Eastern Africa and Indian Ocean, that they put those measures in place which are meant to deter pirates from attacking the ships while transiting in the region. So the member states have to see to it that they implement the Djibouti Code of Conduct. Now, when it comes to the question on quality of graduates that match the quality required for the market, of course, the IMO has got the STCW, which is the standards of training, watchkeeping, and certification of seafarers. So it is up to the member states have to ensure that the institutions that are offering maritime training, at minimum, they meet the requirements of the STCW convention, at minimum. You find that a lot of countries even exceed those minimum requirements. But how do they do that? Is to ensure that the Maritime Administration, in the case of Kenya Maritime Authority, has to work with the institutions that certify the training requirements, that the syllabuses that are taught in the universities or colleges or so forth match international requirements. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I will now ask a follow-up question on what has been presented, and in particular, the Technical Cooperation Committee, which you have worked intimately with for many, many years, implementing projects around the world. And the question is, has that committee implemented any projects that are geared towards resolving the problem facing marine cadets when it comes to getting sea service, the statutory requirement on sea service? Has the IMO and the Technical Cooperation Committee engaged on trying to facilitate resolving this problem that mostly faces developing countries around the world?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President, for that question. The issues of sea time for cadets has been on the IMO agenda for many, many years. It's not a new item, it's an ongoing issue, not only in developing countries, but even some of the developed countries have got this problem of cadets. I, for one, some years back, requested Poland, because there were a lot of African cadets in the training institutions, including DMI, Dar es Salaam Maritime Institute, that were not getting sea time. So IMO approached Poland. Gdynia Maritime University in Poland has got a training ship, which is one of the tall ships. So we approached them, and we had some funds that were left from the Seafarers Fund, and we made arrangements, and they accepted to take on a certain amount of cadets from Africa to go to Poland and train on this training vessel. It was a very successful program. We ran it over 3 years. And after 3 years, of course, to be able to fly these cadets from their countries to Poland, IMO had to pay for it, or this Seafarers Fund paid for it. And also, while they were on board, we had to make sure that for their the cost of their accommodation and their food and pocket money, we paid for it, which came to almost $1,000 per month per per cadet. Now, when the program finished, I, for one, approached a number of African countries, because what Cardinia Maritime University was saying, that during the winter months, this ship is laid in port. So what we are trying to do was to say, fine, during the winter months, this vessel could come and operate along the African coast. So all that was needed was if the African countries would meet the cost of operating this vessel, the fuel, the crew cost, and so forth. So for 3 months every year, the vessel would be relocated from Poland and come and operate along the African coast. We came up with the project, we came up with the costing, approached a number of African member states, but of course, it did not succeed because not many countries were willing to put up, contribute towards that cost. But it is something that is still on the table. Some of the measures that IMO tries to do through the Technical Cooperation Committee is to ask some developed countries that have got training ships, that when they build new training ships, the ones that they are taking out of service, if those training vessels could be donated to some of the developing countries to operate. But of course, even if somebody gives you a training ship free of charge, you must also be able to have funds to operate that vessel. But if South Africa, for example, some years back, South Africa was able to acquire a training ship, and they are using it very successfully. So what we need in Kenya is not only to depend on asking other shipping lines to take on our cadets, is to see if we can actually acquire a training ship that can be used by all the cadets from the various training institutions. So this is something that is work in progress, and if there is anything that I can do to facilitate that, I'll be able to do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, again for that quite enlightening answer. I'm very sure the cadets and marine students that are here with me were quite encouraged to hear that there is effort through the IMO, and there is a way to resolve the sea service problem here in Kenya, following such kind of proposals that you have highlighted this evening. Thank you very much.
I should add that part of the reasons why we are trying to revive Kenya National Shipping Line is that if we are able to operate Kenya National Shipping Line as we should, then at least some of the cadets will be able to get their sea time on Kenyan vessels. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. owing to the constraint of time, I would just ask for a very short comment on one issue that you highlighted in your presentation with regards to the IMO moving towards addressing ocean affairs. And are we looking to a future where DOALOS, the Department of Ocean Affairs and Law of the Sea at the UN in New York, would there be perhaps a future where the functions of IMO and the functions would merge to an extent that we'll be looking at one agency in the future? And secondly and lastly, with your international experience at the IMO, what would be your commentary with regards to setting up a dedicated maritime department within the African Union? Because we see quite a lot of instruments coming up, the African Maritime Charter, we have the AIMS 2050, African Integrated Maritime Strategy 2050, the Lome Charter, and so many others. But they are quite disintegrated without having one dedicated agency in the fashion of the IMO globally. So perhaps a regional agency within the AU in the fashion of IMO that would be dedicated and consolidate the maritime agenda for Africa. Your quick comments as we close down the webinar, sir.
Well, with regard to the issue of DOALOS and the IMO, I should add, apart from that, you have got the International Seabed Authority with headquarters in Kingston, Jamaica. So the three organizations, DOALOS, ISA, and IMO, they've got their own mandate, but some of the issues are cross-cutting. So I don't see a situation where these organizations would merge into one. Indeed, you may have heard of BBNJ, which stands for Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction. There has been, just before COVID came in, they were trying to come up with a new or revised convention on BBNJ. And during those discussions, there was a lot of talk from member states saying that who should take the lead in the issues of BBNJ. Should it be DOALOS, should it be IMO, or should it be the Seabed Authority? These are issues that would normally be taken up by member states, and I don't see member states agreeing to have one organization. What the member states are calling for is a closer cooperation between the three organizations that deal with these ocean issues. When you come to the issues of the AU, I don't think there's anybody that has fought to have a dedicated maritime department in the AU more than myself. I have done that for the last 15 years, but when it comes to the AU, I don't think that will will ever happen. I could give a full 40 minutes talk on that matter, but for the time being, the documents you have referred to, the African Maritime Transport Charter, I was actually involved in it. In almost 90% of it is drafting in Durban in 2009. The other M2050 strategy. But what is lacking in the African Union, you have to look at how African Union runs its affairs. The commissioners are elected and they serve a term of 5 years. They are political appointees. Most of the time, they are former ministers in their countries, and during the election, when they elect the AU chair, there is negotiations to have a regional balance on who should be a commissioner for infrastructure, a commissioner for security, and so forth. And for quite some time, maritime issues were not being given attention at the African Union. I lobbied a lot to have the maritime matters to be reflected. And when we came up with the M2050 strategy, we hoped that maritime issues would now take more and more steps at the AU. I don't know if you are aware, in July 2015, to be precise, on the 25th of July, we were at the AU headquarters when they launched that 25th of July every year will be celebrated as the Day of Africa's Seas and Oceans. It was at the same day that was launched the Decade of African Seas and Ocean, which was meant to run from July 2015 to July 2025. However, when it comes to implementation, when I was still in IMO, I was telling the African Union that they have to take a lead in sensitizing the member states to celebrate the 25th of July as a day dedicated for African seas and oceans. However, their answer was they write to Foreign Affairs, to the Ministries of Foreign Affairs. When they write to the Ministries of Foreign Affairs telling them that the countries should celebrate 25th of July, the Ministries of Foreign Affairs do not pass that information to the Ministries of Transport, or by the time they pass it to them, it is too late. So these are some of the issues that are coming up, and I, for one, would rather advocate for maritime authorities at national level being strengthened to do what they should do, rather than African Union, because you'll not get far with African Union. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that very enlightening answer again. All I can say is that we wish that we had the time to allow you to elaborate much further than the time that we could afford this evening. Each one of those answers, as you rightfully put it, could have been a 40 minutes presentation or in and of itself. And so we are left quite thirsty to hear from you in the near future. And we hope that you will be generous as you have been, to come back and address some of these issues in a better depth. I take this opportunity to thank you, to extend my gratitude to you, sir, from members of the Association of Maritime Practitioners of Kenya and all participants who have made it to be with us for this webinar this afternoon. And to all our distinguished participants, I thank you as well for finding time to join our presenter, and in particular to those who asked questions. You made it quite interactive, and I'm very sure you jogged the mind of our presenter today, who's always happy to be engaged and to inspire and to motivate, particularly young people who have attended in good numbers this afternoon. I wish to thank you all and apologize that we are not able to allow any further questions owing to the limits, time limits. So we've gone way beyond what we had planned. But again, it was called for because there's so much to be discussed on the topic. Our presenter is very well endowed with information and knowledge on the subject. And we hope that he will rise up to the occasion next time that we invite him again. So thank you so much. And lastly, we have a request here from the students in particular. They have asked me through their lecturers if the presenter would be willing to share the presentation with them. for their own studies and references. And I will speak again with our presenter, Mr. SHIUNDU, and maybe he will be able to provide the presentation as it is, or perhaps he may have other suggestions as to how he can be able to pass some of the information that he has presented this afternoon. Thank you so much, and I wish to call upon Mr. SHIUNDU to give his parting words to all our participants. Mr. SHIUNDU, sir, your parting words.
Yes, thank you very much for having given me the opportunity, and I do hope that I've been able to share some of my knowledge with the participants. And please, I've put my email in the chat. If anybody at any time wants to ask me a question or whatever, feel free to contact me. And for the presentation, I will share with you the presentation in a PDF format. Then you can share it with the participants. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, sir. I hope that you're drinking lots of coffee or perhaps English tea there in London. And we hope to see you back here, or perhaps see you in London hopefully soon. Asante sana, and to all our participants across the world, thank you across all the time zones. Good evening, and blessed